Hello, everyone. So it's 50 years this year since the publication of Platform for Change. And on this occasion, I'm going to talk to you about protocols for change. You may ask, what kind of protocols? Maybe the answer will surprise you. Any kind of protocols. That sounds strange maybe in the beginning of the talk. Let's see. Will sound strange at the end of the talk. Some of you know me. Those who don't, I do consulting on social technical system, which naturally has a technical aspect and a social aspect. The technical is more lucrative, the social is more satisfactory. This brings observations and funds to do research and writing that bring back other things. And a lot about the talk today will be about power symmetries, or rather modes of coordination to avoid power symmetries. And there is more power symmetry when you give a talk. You are on the position to change the slides, to go backward and forward, and the audience not. So let's eliminate that. You have the slides, you have exactly the same access as me. The additional benefit is, if you see that at some point I'm talking about something boring, they're full of links, you can click on something and read something more interesting at the same time. Another important message is that I'm trying to also walk the talk. These slides are coming to you courtesy of the HTTP protocol. There are no PowerPoint out things coming, just this thing that we all share in our devices. So this is my fifth talk, but following the first three, the talk were at the organization scale. And then 2 years ago, it went to personal scale. Now, for the first time, I'm going to talk at the society. I would like to talk about coordination because I believe if coordination is considered broadly enough, most of the problems that we have in the world are problems of coordination. But let's start slow. Let's start from something that we experience every day, coordination of intersections. So about intersections, coordination of traffic, you can get either speed or speed. That is the common knowledge. And but then we have roundabouts, and miraculously, roundabouts reduce delays by 89%, and they cut fatal crashes by 65%. How could that be? Let's compare them with the other two ways of coordinating intersections. So you have manual control, you have traffic lights, and you have the roundabout. Manual control is a centralized way where the person, based on the sensors and radio signals, is making a judgment. And the traffic lights, there's a machine that would work with a wide range of regimes, from simple time sensors to more sophisticated with some adaptability to smart sensors, and recent ones that you would use AI. So a whole range of possible algorithms. That's an important thing for platforms, the algorithm. And then we have the roundabouts. So at the roundabout, you do not have person controlling, you don't have machine controlling, just the infrastructure, the built infrastructure, and the affordances. And the simple rule yield to a circulating traffic is creating a very good coordination. It is an example of distributed cognition enabled by a protocol and nothing else. We can, of course, talk a lot about how it happens, and now we know, because of the success of roundabouts, they are everywhere. There are more and more roundabouts. Manual control is the only ever exception, and of course they assume that the traffic is continuous when there are cyclists and pedestrians. Still, there are other modes of control. I would like to use this very simple example to sort of generalize the modes of coordination in the following way. The manual control is a general mode of coordination involving a leader. Traffic lights, I would say, that is a general control using platform, and we'll talk later what is a platform. The roundabouts, that is something to exemplify protocol. Let's start with a very quick comparison. Now, the main thing which distinguishes protocols from platforms of leaders is the mediation itself. Look, everything is mediated. I think in the beginning of last century, Vygotsky said that every action is mediated. But here in a leader and platform, there is an intermediary. Now let's go and compare it with a few other dimensions. So with leader, we have a single person or council that is the intermediary. With the platform, there's some social technical gatekeeper. Now, in recent years, people associate platform with digital platform. Later on, I will invite you to enlarge this understanding. I will try to define that platforms are large. And then for protocols, there is no intermediary, or at least for good protocols. And we will talk about later what is a good bad protocol. The second important dimension is single point of failure. So that is for leader mode is very high, for platform is quite high, although it's for platform is a multi-center in a way. So let's take a digital platform, for example, it can fail at different points like infrastructure, the services, it could be from the point of the owner of the platform and so on. And for protocols, it's many more. And then an important thing is the power locus. It's an individual. In the case of platform, it's always platform owners. It's a very important thing. And the protocol. So this table evolves. When I learn new things, I change here and there. And I started to allow that in some cases, standard bodies and major implementers, they can get some power when it comes to protocols. And now the important topic for the power asymmetries. With the leader-based coordination mode is potentially high, platform significant, with the protocols is quite low. The rule thickness is linked to a particular understanding of what is rule thickness. That comes from the book of Lorraine Dayston, where the rule thickness is the dependency of the context when you apply a rule. So when you depend on context and judgment, the rule is thick. Otherwise, as a rule statement may be very short. And the opposite. So the more you go to the right, the more you can automate, and it becomes context independent and judgment independent. And then the rule transparency in the case of reader is different case by case. For platforms, you have terms of service, but often they're opaque. And for protocols, it's always explicit. Adaptability for leader is limited. For platform is moderate. Sometimes it's high. For protocol, I wasn't able to really, it could be varied. For example, technical protocols, they evolve very slowly. And that's an important feature. People rely on this stability. But other protocols, like greeting protocols, they could be very adaptive. So remember how greeting protocols changed when the social distancing protocol was put on top of that during the pandemic. Some protocols can really adapt fast, other can't. So that's not really a distinctive feature. And then the scalability is really poor. It's finally it's gone. Platform is quite high, and for protocol, it's good in theory, but in many cases, it's quite a challenge. Let's go one by one and review these modes of coordination, starting with leaders. Leaders in business are highly valued. Now you see here the top CEOs, they get from $50 to $200 million salaries. Also in politics, the amount of money that go to US election campaigns is enormous. It reached $2 billion. It seems that we always want to be saved by heroes, by special people. Some want to be saved by special people with a sword, other with a special people holding a pen. So we have this kind of maybe a bit simplistic archetypes of the one fox coming from Pareto based on Machiavelli. But all the debate is how to get better leaders, but not to discuss the shared premises of all leaders. And if you look closer, you'd see that this common desire to be saved by special people is inspired by fairy tales, fantasy stories, and action movies. So why don't we take the characteristics of these narratives and use them also for classification? It will be maybe simplistic classification, but I think it works pretty well. And so we will get this simple matrix. Let's go to every quadrant. So we have upper left quadrant. And therefore, a historical example of somebody belonging to that as a leader politically, I would nominate Idi Amin. As a contemporary example, a random pick from the MAGA elite will be spot on. There is no need to do more. Then if you go to the right, maybe as a historical example, Neville Chamberlain will be a good example. He was put in good intention, but I lacked strategic foresight to say that. Is that down to the bottom left, I would say Stalin. And then to the right, as an example from the near history from the same lands, maybe Gorbachev was also a good example. As more contemporary, I would say just in the Arden. Now, what is common by all these examples? All these examples are common by that they have always certain political, social, structural pressures, and they don't last long for different reasons. We can discuss how Gorbachev happened, how it happened that Jacinta Ardern, after she showed quite impressive crisis leadership, she left post midterm. But we don't need to keep only with political leaders. Let's take Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter. So he created a world of free speech that inspired millions of people to go there and to believe this is possible on a platform. Then, it was replaced with Parag Agrawal at some point this year, but that didn't change much. What changed the whole thing was when Elon Musk took over. So everything that was remnant of Dorsey's ethos was gone very quickly. Why does it happen? Well, there are different explanations. One of them I like a lot is from this book, Dictator's Handbook. In fact, when you are this type of leader, you need support by various diverse groups, and it's very difficult to satisfy their interests. While when you're in other quadrants, you need just a small loyal minority, and if you keep that minority happy, then you can last long. But in some cases, it's not that that kind of leader will just step out or will be replaced. They themselves can evolve. I like very much this meme where from information wants to be free, for the same person in a few years it goes to, have you considered monetizing empathy? So that could be a personal evolution that from that quadrant somebody could go to another. For now, I'll start with leaders. Later on, we'll go back to them when we see what can be done about it. Platforms. So what is a platform? I would suggest the following definition: a socio-technical intermediary that coordinates and governs interactions among participants. Having this definition, apart from, so that would right away apply to digital platforms. So we have Facebook that coordinates social interaction between people. We have Amazon that coordinates interaction between buyers and sellers. We have Uber that coordinates those that want transport and those that provide transport. But this definition allows something more to do. So besides digital platforms, some institutions are also platforms. And which institutions are platforms? That's not the best question. I think a better question is, how much is an institutional platform? And I think this pattern should be applied to many things, because we are used to talk in risk sets, which has all kinds of problems, including with budgeting. That's why now what is coming is an amazing book by Steve Morridge, which had the pleasure to read and give feedback on the draft about fuzzy business. It's very much linked with what we're talking about at BBA, so on. But now let's focus, how much is institutional platforms? I would try to show it with a simple diagram where when it's the center, that is 100% membership of that set. Then it gets less, and at the border it's 50%, and then less than that. So for sure, bank and notaries provide almost entirely only intermediary service. Then maybe you'll be surprised to see to other things which I have the audacity to call platforms: nation states and representative democracies. Churches, another platform. Then for university, it's on the border, and surely things like museums and hospitals are rather not platforms. Let's see why this is the case, exactly with these examples, based on this statement that platforms provide intermediation, structure, and control. I packed a lot in this book, but let's unpack it a bit. First, intermediation. How do commercial banks? Well, they provide intermediation between borrowers and savers, central banks, between commercial banks, governments, and the broader economy. Representative democracies, they provide intermediation in two ways. One is one written here, that elected representatives act as intermediaries, distribution of commons between citizens and translating public needs into policies. That's one way, but apart from them, to sustain all that system, we have all the democratic institutions that are also intermediaries, not only representatives, but those bureaucracies that are important. And maybe in advance to say that now when the trust goes down, when a few people go to vote and institutions are experiencing erosion, this might sound like, well, we don't need them. No, I believe that the reforms are futile, but they need to be supported as long as we really have reliable alternatives. So don't take my statement as let's talk about. They have a very important role, but it's a historic role. It's time to move on. So nation states, the government acts as an intermediary between citizens and national affairs. It's very much how we decided to deal with commons, because we don't believe there are other ways. There are other ways. Churches are double intermediate. They're intermediate between believers and between believers and God. And we have digital platforms, I already said, that they connect users, social interactions, or service providers with consumers. And now the other criteria, infrastructure and affordances. So, of course, commercial banks, they have branch networks, ATMs, and so on. Central banks, they have payment and settlements systems. Representative democracy, they have legislative frameworks, electoral systems, and bureaucratic processes. And nation states, they have provide public infrastructure to enable service delivery and civic participation. Churches have cathedrals, chapels, and altars, and digital platforms have their computing infrastructure. And then governance and control. Commercial banks, they have the frameworks or governance in compliance. Central banks, they have settlement rules. Constitutions is what representative democracies have for governance and control. And we have nation states that enforce legislation over a territory drawn by wars. Churches, they have canon law, and we have digital platforms which are in terms of service that are enforced by automated algorithms. So if you put the DSM glasses, you can see that certain societal system tools evolve into viable systems. And that is a quite common situation of pathological pieces. So let's move to protocols now. For protocols, the best way to understand what's going on is this wide-hand statement. Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without talking about that they disappear. And because it disappears, we don't talk enough about these important things that made this advancement. We don't put enough attention to that. Let's make an experiment. Can we free one table? So I will need 4 volunteers for a small experiment, very quick. There will be nothing embarrassing, I promise. 2 tomorrow. Very simple task. It will only take a few seconds. Here are the rules. I have to hold each the leg like this with one hand. And then whole exercise is you have to lift the table this high and bring it back without spinning. And you all observe what's going on. I can go back. Thank you very much. Now let's discuss what happened. And now, yes, now, what happened? These four people had to do something together. We succeeded only because of a social protocol. One of them, Jonathan, said 2, 3, go. And that made the sync happen. Now, let's see all the layers. So we have this social coordination, which happened with the protocol. But it works over a sensory motor coordination. So each of these 4 persons have dozens of sensory motor loops that were able to do that. It was coordination of these coordinations. But that only happened because of another coordination. These people, they, with some hesitation, came in front together. Imagine if the 4th people will come in an hour. Another coordination. But that only happened because these 4 people came to this event, same place and same time. That was enabled by coordination tools. We had websites, the Metform website, the shared website, email, calendar, clock. All these things only work because of layers of protocols that we don't think about at all. Here's an example. Website is HTTP or HTTPS working over TCP, working over AP, and then depending on how you access it, other Ethernet, Wi-Fi, 4G or 5G. Then email is using SMTP protocol, IMAP, again over the same chain. Each one relies on the lower layer. Calendar dev is based on WebDev, HTTP, and again, digital clock. I now put what would enable digital clocks, but for mechanical clocks, there are other protocols. So you see all these layers with the cherry of Jonathan 2, 3, go made this happen. But we live unaware of all that. Now, let's see what will happen if we give some attention to it. So what is a protocol? I'm not a big fan of definitions, but here are a few. Set of explicit or implicit rules that guide behavior and facilitate coordinated action. Another definition would be a set of rules, norms, incentives, and design affordances. There's a lot of urban protocols that we don't think about that work together to translate a potentially chaotic regime into a more orderly result. And the most enigmatic and the most parsimonious one is a protocol is an engineering argument, which I'll not have time to defend, but if you go to this source, you will see amazing essays on that. So here is just an example how a protocol lifecycle will go. I'm not going to go through it, get more time for discussion. And there is a protocol guide where you can see certain attempts to put dimensions. For example, on the right is the systemic atomic hard soft, where you see things like physical greetings, Kyoto Protocol, or intermodal ship containers, which are a very important transport protocol, but we don't think about it in these terms. And if you want to learn more about protocols, I would highly recommend this free book, very recent work, which has some very interesting writings on different aspects, things like memory, things like tensions, things like bad protocols, or Kafka protocols, and so on. I personally work on several protocols. One of them is Serendipity Protocol, because I believe that digital workspace and urban environments can be designed to increase the likelihood of serendipitous events, not just to hope that they happen, but actually to rely that they will happen. And 2 years ago, I talked a bit about that. So far, there are 6 articles out if you want to check them out. But protocols, they're not lucky, because you see, there is this vicious situation. When protocols work, they disappear. Out of sight, out of mind. You don't talk about them. That's why they're not something interesting. They're visible, but they don't work. So they either are invisible or we talk badly about them. And how we could move efforts to a situation where either doesn't exist or is not associated with anything good. That's a bit of a problem. The other interesting thing is that protocols are always associated with some initial friction. And a lot of bad effects that we have now from platforms are associated with the opposite. There was a very nice article. I should have put a link here called The Tyranny of Convenience. But anyway, so for example, I drove here from London, changing the protocol, driving on the right from driving on the left, created initial friction, but it was overcome very quickly. Then again, here from England, a very good example that I absolutely love, although I have not read a lot about it and have not been there, is the Swindon roundabout. Anyone went through that? Anyone to multiple times? So it has a very bad reputation. People talk badly about it. It's been there since 1972, but the statistics are amazingly good. So it seems that if you go several times through it, it doesn't really bother you so much. And it works really well, although it's quite a complicated thing. Well, another example would be the situation with Twitter. So we have this thing I called Exodus, where when people saw what happened with Twitter, they went to protocol-based alternatives. And they had a lot of friction, because it's really weird. You normally just go and enter and then start using it. But now there is no such a thing. You have to choose an instance. Then when you want to follow your server, you have to make another step to copy it. There are quite a few strange things, like you're going back to do something more primitive. So there is also a lot more agency. And it doesn't mean that people appreciate agency, but those that do, they overcome this friction and they set it. And now they're in Twitter alternatives. I think there are about 10 million people using Fediverse and 35-40 using Blue Sky only within 2 years. I would say that good protocols are autonomous. What I mean by autonomous, I think you're already into it, what I mean, but sometimes I use this tool called the constructor or etymology. And if it's an existing word, it gives the etymology. If it's not, it makes it up. So when I tried with autonomous, the idea was that this actually means cautious self-governance. Well, that's not what I mean, but I found it very, very cute. What I do mean is a cohesion with minimum or no loss of autonomy. So, and I believe that good protocols enable cohesion with minimum or no loss of autonomy, and that statement I defended in that with a lot of examples. So, autonomy and cohesion, it's based on the claim that viability and welfare of social data systems depend on their ability to balance autonomy and cohesion. This is, of course, coming from the BSM. I extended it further in my first book, Essential Balances, and now even further related to technologies. And there is a series of things, if you're interested, you can read why. But also, here's my definition, which might be a bit different from yours. I define it as the action or fact of forming a whole or acting as a whole. And also, you can see it in some words, so like in the word unison and unity, that uni, the word for Latin word for one, is taking this static and dynamic aspect. In BSM, you can see them in some cases separated. Here, I see it as one thing. And here again, in these two things, I explained why. I'm not going to, I think you are well aware with that. So good protocols are autonomous, and because all cohesion mechanisms, they impose some constraints, protocols, good ones, they increase autonomy and agency of the coordination participants with a minimum loss. So they provide cohesion and they reduce a bit of agency because you have to follow the protocol. But by doing that, they amplify your variety and they increase your agency. Again, some things that go more into detail. It doesn't mean that they immune of power asymmetries. They can still happen. But when they happen, there is a way to resolve them. And now we have very good historical examples for that. There were some power asymmetries that happened with Ethereum protocol. People did not agree in the way things were going. There were certain influencers that took some. And then to resolve that, they made the so-called hard fork. So because everything open source continued its own way in 2016, and people kept the value of their money using that. So this was, again, exercising autonomy in a essential way. By the way, there is something interesting here also, connection to Jacques Rancière. He had this idea of essential democracy. Similar thing happened with Bitcoin twice, hard forking, which means no backward compatibility. It goes on its way, but you don't lose value. And you can see that as a mitosis, as a way cells, they split the chromosomes and then they become to the. So the mitosis that is happening through S2. The next fork goes around it is a whole new viable system, which is an interesting thing to think about. That is very much related with the general principle, which is known as credible exit. I would call it low-cost exit or no-cost exit, I don't know what it's called, but it's how it is known. And it's already available in many protocols that we use. So there's so many things that we only now start to appreciate. Let's start with the protocol like DNS, domain name servers. So imagine this was just a simple idea to decouple network addresses and domain names. Enormous effects. Now host providers cannot trap you. You can just go to another and remap it. The same with email, with JIT-based systems, with Fediverse, with Blue Sky. The last one is publishing platform using the same principles. So that's all I wanted to just describe a few characteristics of the leader mode of coordination, platform mode of coordination, and the protocol mode of coordination. So, and the question might be, can we replace our ecosystem platforms with protocols? A reminder of this comparison, because it could help to try to answer this question. Historically, there are quite a few attempts. For example, we have protocol-based religions. They're not known as such, but I have a good reason to call them so. The first one was in the 7th century, Volicians. It started from Armenia. The founder, Constantine, later on replaced by Simeon. And these people, they were Christians that rejected the need for an intermediary like the church. Then in Bulgaria, on the 10th century, were the Bogomils. Then two sects appeared in South France. Brethren of the Free Spirit. This is a very interesting Christian movement. It originated in the lowlands. I'll come back to it. And then we have a few others. Quakers are very interesting, but I split them in two. Why I split them in two? Because you see, here I see these regions as in two dimensions. So all of them are not using platforms, if we understand the use of platform, but only some of them are leaderless. For example, the Quakers, late Quakers, were not leaderless. One of them remained leaderless, the Brethren of the Free Spirit. It's very interesting because when I researched more, it turned out that there are a lot of leaderless organizations that were quite successful coming from the lowlands. There is something there. Now, of course, everybody knows Burzorg and similar. But there is a tradition. If you go back to Middle Ages, before, it's quite a thing. Of course, all these were small. Most of them were prosecuted. So the missions, the first leader, he was stoned to death. The second was burned, and so on.
Be cautious.
Be cautious. There was a very nice Readerless Protocol example by a guy, Cronenberg, who, by the way, was inspired by VSM, and this, how we wrote this paper. But the important thing is that it wasn't about something, but actually he wrote an application to enable that. It was a very simple thing to distribute chores in a co-living house in a way that is fair and more motivating for people. And it worked. But again, small scale. Maybe the first thing which we saw at the big scale from protocol was Blue Sky, where for less than a year, it scaled up to 35 million users. So that's the interesting thing. You see, I started with pairing roundabouts with traffic control, with manual control, and now we use manual control only by exception if there is something special. There is a lot of data to understand that protocol-based roundabouts work better. But somehow that's absolutely not the case when we talk about other coordination, not transport. That's very strange. So maybe if we get inspiration by this parallel, we can use leaders only in special cases and in some kind of rotating principles and so on. But the evidence is that protocols work quite well as platform alternatives. Now, people that work with Bitcoin and Ethereum completely bypass the banks. They don't need them, neither commercial or the central banks. Social media platforms like ActivityPub and AT Protocol, Blue Sky, these are protocols. They can allow agency for their users. Firestore system, especially the IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, that is decoupling content from hosts by using the content addressing system. Messaging platforms like XMPP and Metrics. And now a few observations that maybe in the beginning you will not see why they're so much related, to see in a wider ideological sense certain coordination paradigms. So if you get the Marxism, every time it got the chance, it turned authoritarian. Now, if we just examples of those that have claimed for egalitarian regimes that have powers. Anarchism, it never got a chance. Why it never got a chance? Because in the beginning, it was fine, but then from 1991, when certain terrorist assassinations were associated with anarchists, it had a very bad image. So anarchy was not what it actually meant, but is associated with chaos, with killing, just because they practice something called the propaganda of the deed. So basically the idea being, well, if we don't need governance, let's take them out, let's kill them. But that was just a different kind of understanding of authorities. Others, like Kropotkin, in the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, had a completely different ideas. And by the way, he was one of the few that said that Marxism, if linked with a nation state, would always lead to authoritarian regime. But what is interesting, these two things, Marxism and anarchism, they share a principle, which is the most utopian of all. And you know that principle, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Utopian, improbable. And that's the only one shared by these two. At the same time, that's the only thing that happened in practice massively everywhere. And that's all open source projects. They work exactly on this principle, incredibly successful. We have Linux and all the internet runs on Linux, and of course, many others, browsers and so on. So open source projects, contributors, they contribute according to their abilities and interests. Users according to their needs. You can just go and start using them, anything. It's enabled by the protocol, by the JIT protocol. Always, no exception. Now, if I give the floor to my internal voice, it will say that's not quite the case, because in fact, this is because there is a constant external energy supply. So you have a surplus of the current economy that allows these people to get good jobs, to be well paid, and to have enough time to contribute to this project. So in fact, this is part of the money, of the surplus of what they get for their economy-enabled regular job. And you would see that energy supply in terms of employer-sponsored time, corporate and foundation funding, infrastructure subsidies, and academic and non-profit grants. But here's a counter-argument. Open source projects are commons, and they should be financed as commons. I have no idea why none of our taxes actually go there, and so many people are using them. We talked at some point about coordination layers when we made this example with demonstration with a table. Now, let's think about coordination levels. We have a local level of city, village, where we live, where you have short feedback loops and things are dynamically adapting. And we have the phenomenon of cities that really last long because they have a way to adapt while growing. And then we have nation state level and we have a global level. So do we really need nation state? And just a reminder of this diagram, because nobody lives in a nation state. We live in a city. We actually can respond to something that happens directly. Of course, the cities needs to coordinate globally, but should that coordination happen through the intermediary of territories with legislation in these territories that then something happened historically through wars. Not to mention that when they happened, they had to reduce all the complexity that was local, for example, the way land was used into something that was simpler to administer. According to Stefan Pianot, it's called a tragedy. We are stuck with a historical process that has produced nations and nations. So in fact, we are stuck in the 17th century. It was a very good innovation. This painting depicts the Treaty of Münster. So we have this Peace of Westphalia that created the whole idea of nation state. And it was very good because there was 30-year or 80-year war. It brought peace, it brought the idea of sovereignty, all good things. But the world moved on. And this idea stayed. We may not be able to imagine another world, but lack of imagination by itself is not an argument. If we look at the history, the history of science especially is like a search for regularities. We have Aristotle that searched for regularities in language and discovered logic. Then cybernetics, regularities in system, discovered feedback, law of requisite variety, BSM, these kind of things. Stephen Wolfram said something very good. He said, Aristotle stopped too quickly. There are more regularities in language. And now we have LLMs that through their parameters, so imagine now OpenAI, they do not disclose after 3.5 the number of weights, the parameters they use, but there are probably a few trillions, of which about 600 billion parameters are active. So imagine how this is all patterns discovered in language. What level of granularity this compared to if you count all axioms of logic and all atomic rules that the first level of regularities. So maybe by this example, cybernetics can only search for deep regularity systems and embed them in protocols. Not so much in models, because protocols, they operationalize these things. Google says this principle, which is fake, of course, do no harm, but protocols can make it so that you can't do any harm. And it's not a matter of learning something, it's a matter of way we live, the way you saw how this coordination happened with the table. Let's search for these regularities and embed them in protocols. Thank you.